welcome to the Lunch and Learns Marketing in MedTech. Today's webinar is brought to you by University Lab Partners. My name is Teresa Fry. I'm the advanced coordinator here at University Lab Partners. We're going to talk about a couple things. University Lab Partners is a nonprofit premier wet lab tech incubator located at the UCI Research Park in Irvine, California. We provide researchers with over 22,000 square feet of scientific resource and contributing to the acceleration of innovation in Orange County. We do have benefits that encompass our flexible lab and office space, our state-of-the-art scientific equipment, over $3 million worth, access to UCI's technical core resources, and on-site experts and residents. At ULP, we provide extensive support for commercialization endeavors through a wide array of resources and activities. So we don't forget to connect with us at the end. We did have a slideshow presentation, but we were having some technical difficulties with that. But a little housekeeping just to let you know, we are going to have everybody muted for the webinar. There'll be a Q&A session at the end of the presentation, but feel free to ask questions during the webinar by writing them in the chat box. Most importantly, the presentation is recorded and the presentation PDF will be sent to you in a follow-up email. Today's webinar is presented by Jeff Polack with Venture Marketing Consulting. Jeff has over 35 years of early stage marketing, clinical and business development expertise in the MedTech, medical device, and digital health. He has a master's in business administration from the Carson School of Management at the University of Minnesota and a graduate degree in biochemistry and plant philosophy from the University of Minnesota College of Biosciences, and his bachelor's of arts degree is in biological sciences and history from St. John University. So thank you so much for being here, Jeff, and I'll turn the presentation over to you now.
Thank you, Teresa. Nice to virtually meet everybody. A very good way to get involved with some entrepreneurs and folks that are getting new medical technologies started and trying to see the light of day in terms of approvals and commercializations. I'm here today to give, I suppose you could call it a lecture, but we'll caveat that a little bit. I'm going to talk about MedTech, medical device, digital medical marketing, and how it applies to early stage efforts like what most of you are presumably involved with. So I'm going to cover a few points. It's going to be very high level in some areas, and some of the slides are going to look real detailed, but I promise we'll get through them. It's not rocket science. It's something that people have to have an open mind about. And with that, we'll launch. So let's see, I'm not... I guess I have to hit next slide. There we go. So here's an outline of what I'm going to cover. What is marketing? My experience you heard from Teresa, so I'll pass on that for right now. And so now the question is, so what is marketing? A lot of people, interestingly enough, have some fairly variable responses to the question. Really high level, all it is simply what it says in orange there. And I just made it orange because let's put an odd color in, because really marketing is identifying the needs of your customers, and your customers can really represent all your stakeholders. Maybe it's physicians, maybe it's patients, maybe it's insurers or payers, could be other stakeholders as well. But how do you identify their needs and then fulfill them in a manner that is profitable to the organization? So the purpose of a business, if you step back, really is in any business, whether you're Tim Cook at Apple or you're the CEO of Medtronic, you're in the business to create customers. It's all about creating customers. And what marketing does is, for the whole business, we want you to see it from the customer perspective. So we're even more so than sales, representative of customer feedback, customer needs. So if you look at in a little more detail, and I apologize, some of these slides, I didn't want to have 50 slides, so I put a lot of things into each slide, but marketing really one of the key things you have to do in marketing, and what is absolutely essential early, mid, late stage, is to ensure that you have very clear, very precise and concise messaging, which is going to support your branding, which is going to define how you speak to the relevant stakeholders or customers. There are two basic marketing functions. There's upstream and downstream marketing. Upstream is really, in a way, it's sort of prior to FDA clearance or CE mark or whatever your regulatory approval is, commercial approval is. And then downstream marketing is once you have approval, more traditional marketing. So an upstream marketing, it's essential, as we've already been touching on, to define appropriate messaging, positioning. That includes, people tend to use the term value proposition. That includes that. Branding, we like to very early on if possible, but sometimes well into middle phase of commercialization, we do a brand audit, because there's usually sometimes you get hired as a consultant and they say, well, we had FDA clearance 2 years ago, but we're just not selling as much as we thought we would. And typically a brand audit is in order early on, or in those sort of situations. Clinical marketing is an essential component of marketing. Marketing, of course, interacts with all the other functional areas. It's really important to partner with the clinical and regulatory folks early on and ensure that we're developing protocols to achieve data and approvals that are going to give us the indications for use that are going to allow us to sell the way we've defined we want to sell in our messaging. Okay. Training, support materials, et cetera. So, and you can see some of the checklist items. I think the differentiation, because some of these overlap, but in downstream marketing, okay, now you've got clearance. Now you're looking to enhance what awareness you established, because you're a little bit constrained about what type of awareness you can create pre-commercial clearance, right? So now you're full bore establishing market awareness. And of course, social media and a lot of other elements are components of that. Very importantly, which is done both up and downstream marketing, is commercialization planning, and then of course execution. And it's a very important, I was going to say it's almost axiomatic to say, as part of commercial planning and execution, that you're continually reviewing your commercial plans and modifying and adapting and learning where you can, and making those necessary adjustments. Sales enablement is very important. I don't want to diminish this, because the last thing I want to do in this discussion with you is make out marketing to be something it's not. A lot of folks in MedTech marketing, probably more so at bigger companies, but maybe smaller companies too, they think, well, marketing is the brains behind everything, and sales is the brawn. I don't view it that way. We're really partnered at the hip with sales. What we have to do is, if we do our job right, sales will do really well. And really, in some respects, that's true of every functional area in the company, whether you're in engineering or operations, et cetera. We want to make it possible for sales to meet the plan or exceed the plan that's been developed as part of our commercial effort. And then another thing marketing does is in clinical marketing, is working with thought leaders, or KOLs, might be a term you use, to obtain appropriate types of data and get it out in the public sphere, where it can have an impact on 1, 2, and 3. No pun intended. And so therefore, in terms of marketing planning, I have the 4 Ds down there. You discover, define, develop, and deliver. I think as we go through this discussion together, I think that'll become more apparent. So I'll go on to the next slide here. So again, what is marketing? The whole idea of creating effective marketing, especially in MedTech, is being consistent and being accurate in your messaging. And so what does that mean? Messaging, positioning, branding, value propositions, that's really the storyline. The storyline, in some ways, it's like what script writing in Hollywood is about, is ensuring that what you're going to do has been well thought out and planned, and you're going to execute according to that plan. So one of the things you do is you focus on the clinical technical specifications, and that's real important because very early on, there's a little bit of the term divination. You sort of put your marketing hat on, but it's not just the marketing people, it's the founders, it's the CEO, it's the other staff. You put your thinking cap on and you determine, okay, well, if we're a 510K and we're 2 years away from potential commercial clearance, how do we want to sell this? Or if you're a PMA and it's a 7-year path to commercial clearance. In any case, early on, you need to sort of give some thought, and it's a little bit of envisioning or divination is how do I want to sell this? In other words, what it would be a potential indication for use, and therefore, how would we design the business, the clinical efforts, the regulatory pathway, and ensure that we're doing everything to get to how we think we want to sell this product, what that in the definition of the instructions for use would be. So the other thing we do in messaging is explaining our features and benefits. You've probably heard those terms ad nauseum, but they're really important and compelling to your customers. So therefore, if they are, you need to pick the right features and, of course, add the right benefits at the hip with those features. So again, we talked about the storyline. So crafting the story, the messaging is just super critical. You have to determine what those benefits are that are wedded to the features and highlight them in a memorable or a fashion that your customers are going to remember. So, and then a sort of a key tool in all of this messaging is very helpful is for all members of the organization, and including, for example, like if you have an advisory board of physicians, let's say, or healthcare providers, you want a short slide deck that highlights your messaging that anyone can pull from as needed, because at the end of the day, you want to sing off the same sheet of music. You don't want to have variations on a theme, if you will, in keeping with music, the musical terminology. So, and then the second component of messaging is to build that customer exposure and interest pre and post commercialization. So we can get into the elements of a marketing plan, but a holistic marketing plan really is designed around the customer's journey. How is your healthcare provider or your patient going to get engaged with you and want to or have a desire to use your product? Offering demos, presentations, training, generalized knowledge sessions. You should have some ideas of how you could gear those towards all your stakeholders. And there are typically multiple stakeholders. You might consider your customer, let's say you have an implantable device. You might think your customer is a surgeon who's going to implant it, but you may be missing the mark if you're not thinking of payers, providers, patients. There's a lot of P's, so remember the P's. Training programs have to be designed that address real customer needs. So it's super important that this flows from the messaging, positioning, and branding of the organization, of the technology and the company. And then informational content strategies are a critical component of addressing customer thoughts, comments, criticisms, questions, objections. And then, of course, ultimately, you want to build credibility with your potential customers and stakeholders. So in terms of clinical marketing, so the previous slide, we're talking about messaging primarily. Now looking at clinical marketing, there's some elements you can do very early on. There's some elements you can do well into the commercial phase. Case studies are something that can carry a lot of weight with early adopters and innovators. You've probably all seen that curve. I don't have a slide for it, but you've got early adopters, innovators, and you've sort of got this big chasm that you have to somehow get over and get to, at least in MedTech, it's the vast majority, 80% of where you're going to be selling is through data-driven selling to the 80%. So case studies can be a helpful tool for all of those, but especially with the early adopters and innovators. They're typically the ones that are creating those well before there's any results from a typical study with a protocol, et cetera. You want to capture data that's relevant, that can be used in all kinds of things, not just potential publications or white papers, but and testimonials, posting on social media and photos, videos, blog posts, podcasts, etc. So another key element is getting determining, what that key data is, and then where do you get it published, and that's getting it out there, and of course peer-reviewed publications. But there's also the different Congress and trade shows, getting abstracts and poster presentations set up there. There's product monographs, white papers, and various marketing tools where you can put data out there that helps to make the case to support the messaging around your product and your technology. And of course, you want references to back up all these claims, and that's what clinical marketing is in the business of helping to determine what the appropriate references that we all utilize to make the story clear to our stakeholders, to our customers. And then we want to partner in clinical studies with our key customers, and build credibility and increase the trust in your brand. Sometimes that's beyond, and in fact, I would say virtually all the time, that should be beyond a typical regulatory study. It's super critical, of course, to get regulatory clearance, but you have to be thinking very early on about what sorts of data do we need to help our customers really say, yes, this is something that's addressing an unmet clinical need for me, and I really want to use it. And so there's a lot of ways to develop additional data. You can do additional studies once there's a clearance. And you can use those studies in a variety of, perform those studies in a variety of ways. It could be simple registries, it could be clinical marketing studies, they could be formal studies with big, challenging protocols, if you will. But ultimately, the other thing you need to do in clinical marketing is monitor your performance, and that's part of looking at the data and understanding what the data says, so that you can look at what are the key indicators and how you're tracking with them, and use that data to really optimize not just your marketing strategies, but really ensure and confirm that your messaging, your positioning, your branding is on point. So I think in terms of what's in a clinical marketing plan, which should be an important element early on in organizations that are attempting to gain traction and get commercialization clearance, you want to define what the data is that you're looking for. You want to confirm the clinical need, the unmet clinical need from your customers. And again, customers or stakeholders can be much more than I've listed here. Any healthcare professional, patients, payers, providers, could be regulatory folks, could be could be investors. So it really, you have to give some thought about what we're obtaining and who it's for. And then you want to also, in terms of clinical marketing plan, detail what the competition is and how they fit into the picture, because, and I'll show a slide in a few minutes here, sort of a funnel when it comes to messaging. You sort of have the unmet clinical need on top of the funnel, and then you kind of go down the funnel. The very end of the funnel is why us? Why what we have, is that a solution? So understanding competition is part of answering and addressing some of those questions to get down to why what you offer. Clinical design, and you want to drive and direct your product and your clinical development relentlessly, and I should have stressed relentlessly there in a different color, but you really want to be rigorous in defining that position in doing ongoing product and clinical development. So if you will, here's sort of the funnel. You sort of, again, when you look at messaging, marketing is all about messaging. You can say branding, you can say value propositions, you can say a lot of things, but at the end of the day, messaging is that storyline. So you're telling the story from the top of the funnel down. That's really a great analogy, because the top of the funnel is that unmet clinical need. You're setting the stage. And at every level in this funnel, you want to be able to put in data that, and when I talked about references, you want data. It doesn't always have to be your own data. There's usually plenty of extant clinical data in the literature that you can access that builds a case around, why the unmet need, what are the potential solutions, clinical solutions, and reinforcing those potential solutions. You can get plenty of references that aren't your own. If you're really unique, you may need to build your own references, and that takes time, of course, but that's what you do when you have an extremely unique technology or product. Then you have to sort of help further down the funnel identify why the current potential solutions aren't sufficient. And maybe not the word problem. Sometimes it could be a problem with potential solutions. You could say, oh, well, there's a potential solution for deep vein thrombosis, but the clinical complications of all those solutions that are on the market today are pretty significant. So we really just rely on putting them in bed and heparinizing them for a few days. So, and then at the end of the funnel, just as an example, of course. So, and then at the end of the funnel is how do you yourselves with your product and technology, your organization meet that unmet clinical need. And just as an example, here's a company I worked for a couple of years ago, dialysis remote monitoring technology startup. And if you tell the story, I turned the funnel on its side here just to sort of show, but the top of the funnel is, if you look at dialysis patients, people that have kidney failure that require going 3 or 4 times a week to be dialyzed, that essentially have impurities removed from their blood, it's a very fraught experience, and the mortality in these patients is pretty high at 5 years. But what's really evident, and you don't need your own literature to do this, it's extant everywhere, is there is very frequent, avoidable, significant complications that lead to hospitalizations and emergency room visits. Is very expensive, and it's a big problem, and there's a lot of mortality and morbidity again. So then the next, going down the funnel, reinforcing that key point, the unmet need, hospitalizations and emergency department visits are highly expensive. I think we all know that. And in dialysis, they're driven by readmissions, number one, fluid overload, arrhythmias, and length of stay. They're typically not there for a few hours. They're there for a few days. So it's very expensive. So so there's plenty of literature that reinforces this level of the funnel. Then the next level is, what are potential clinical solutions? Well, you can do invasive blood draws every month and monitor dialysis patients, but it's just not enough. And there's plenty of extant literature, clinical literature, that shows that increased monitoring yields fewer hospitalizations. Those are some gold nuggets. And those are studies that are not Alio's. Those are studies that exist out there. A lot of them are done by nephrologists, but even more so by emergency department personnel. And again, because the whole thing is high number of readmissions at very high expense. So then reinforcing potential solutions, the next lower level of the funnel, remote monitoring, more so than just doing invasive blood draws, has the potential to identify problems quicker and cheaper and preempt all these things that we're talking about, 1, 2, and 3. And then, so you get towards the bottom of the funnel and you say, what's the current situation with remote monitoring? Well, it's not really focused on dialysis patients, what's out there. And what's out there also, there's, at least as of last year, there are no clinically actionable data in any of the other potential solutions that are available on the market. So it's all about identifying problems earlier, but providing something that's actionable that the nephrologist or the patient or somebody, the nurse, can do something about. So then it gets to why Alio. Well, Alio, in this example, it's preemptive. And yes, it's remote monitoring, non-invasively monitors real time, remotely provides actionable clinical data. And that's how you solve this unmet clinical need, in one example. We can talk about more if you have questions on that. And then to further with that example, here's more on the value proposition. Here's where you can kind of differentiate value proposition as a component of marketing. What value does Alio deliver? Well, everybody says they're a breakthrough technology. Now, in the regulatory people here will say, well, and the FDA has a certain definition of what's breakthrough. So breakthrough with quotes, air quotes around it, okay? But you can say this is where the features come in. It's remote, it's real time, it's not invasive, it's multimetric because you can measure all kinds of different elements, and it's continuous. So the value provided is what happens then. What do you do? And so by using their remote monitoring platform, they decrease these avoidable complications, which brings you to number two, which lowers the readmissions and the hospitalizations. Number three, it empowers dialysis patients to be more engaged in their own care. And that's actually something, it sounds very esoteric, but it's actually super critical because the average dialysis patient is pretty checked out because they probably feel pretty miserable, and you feel, for sure, I've never been dialyzed, but I've seen dialysis, and people are wiped out after they've had a 4-hour dialysis session, having their blood removed and filtered and the impurities removed. And you're doing that, they tend to check out. It's a hard thing to do, to find someone that's really empowered and as a patient advocate that really wants to do something for other dialysis patients. So this could be another significant element of the value proposition. And then we come to sort of examples of what you can do. And this isn't just Aleo, but different companies I've been at. And there's different ways to get this messaging out there through testimonials, through different perspectives of patients, interviews with patient advocates. So you can go to set up a YouTube channel page. It's a great way to really have another place to brand yourself, to really set yourself apart from a lot of others, and have a stable of videos that are applicable everywhere from social media posts to email blasts to your website to sharing, letting the sales team, if you're commercializing, share with potential clients. So, and you can't diminish, again, if you think of that phase of commercialization we talked about, the early adopters and innovators, then you got that chasm, and then you jump to the data-driven, 80%. Well, testimonials work for all those. Testimonials are very compelling, and they actually fulfill a really important function, especially in the early stage. You don't have published clinical data yet. There's someone of notoriety that telling your stakeholders, your customers, that this product could really be a big deal because of X, Y, and Z. And that's really actually pretty important. That's another marketing function, is to work with the thought leaders to get these sorts of testimonials and perspectives and patient advocacy programs established. And then everybody, of course, thinks of, got to have a really cool website, got to have all this social media. I'll tell you, absolutely, the website is the most critical component, because that is, whether you're very early and far away from clinical or from regulatory approval, or you're commercializing and you already have approval, your website is the public face of your organization. And it's super critical to have it established so that people see it and they want to go further. They want to dig it. In other words, you want to have sort of a sex appeal to your website, but you want it to be a resource center. So you want people to say, and start discovering, other places of, bits of information and education that they can find within your website. And part of what social media should be doing and its objectives, obviously you're increasing awareness through different sources like LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, et cetera, but you're also driving them back to your website. Email blasts, you're driving them back to your website. So build your website as an education resource center. And I think we've done that at companies I've worked with. One of them is a spine surgery company called Nanobone, has a bone graft substitute. And it's this really simple synthetic version of basically what your teeth and your bones are made out of, hydroxyapatite. And no mixing, nothing to do. It's the simplest thing in the world to use. Most bone graft substitutes that are out there require a fair amount of preparation, which the surgeons all say it's a pain in the you-know-what. So having a great website is super critical. A great LinkedIn page, a great Facebook page, a great Instagram, etc. That's all important, but it should feed back to the website, and that's super critical to get people looking at you as your provider of solutions to unmet clinical needs. And part of providing a solution is being an educational resource center. And then patient advocacy is super critical. This is what we did at Aleo. We set up a patient advocacy group with 6 different dialysis patients. One was a peritoneal dialysis patient. Most had vascular access fistula or grafts to where you put the big needles in, the cannulation to do dialysis. And these folks that we found and that we involved were advocates that they were, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, in dialysis, these folks tend to be fairly checked out. And so these guys are like the upper 1,000th% of dialysis patients. And there is absolutely no discounting the buzz they feel about a new technology and how it makes their lives better, and how they love to go to all these other dialysis patients in different societies and conferences, et cetera, or on the web, and say, hey, this is really great. They motivate them and they say, there's a technology that can allow you to take better care of yourselves. Wow. Right there, then when you say it's a game changer, instead of saying game changer first, telling a patient you can take better care of yourself, well, yeah, that is a game changer. So patient advocacy is, even prior to FDA clearance, is a super critical element of what you're doing. Certainly post-clearance, when you're commercializing, they can be really strong in support of the selling effort, the commercial effort for your products. And then, of course, the healthcare personnel as well. In this case, with Aleo, dialysis staff nurse, nephrologists, same thing. But the people who do the work, who really do the monitoring of the patients, are the staff nurses in the dialysis units, and they can say things that really get people excited about using the technology as well. So again, there's patient advocacy, but there's also healthcare professional testimonials, which is a form of advocacy as well. And then you design your brochures, your enablement tools for your sales personnel, your sales team. And it's important. It's sort of like this quote Einstein it's attributed to Albert Einstein. And he said, simplicity is really important. Design it to be very simple, but not too simple. So make it simple, straightforward, hit the messaging hard. And that's what you have to do. And on the left, you see an example here of a patient brochure that says, hey, peace of mind. That's what we're offering. It's like, yeah, we offer this patch, this AI algorithm, all this stuff that gets, results-oriented interpretations to your healthcare professionals and to you. But what we really offer through all of that is peace of mind, which you really don't have right now. It's like you got to go in multiple times a month to get blood draws to get tested for a variety of different tests. So in both cases, on the right, you have for healthcare professionals, you say what we are, you say what the key capabilities are and the key components, and you're really emphasizing, again, the messaging around the product technology. And this is this is from a company that I helped start 12 years ago, SI Bone. It's an orthopedic spine surgery company. And you can develop, as I said at the very beginning, you can develop monographs, which are a way of getting data out there, especially when there's all this extant data. You can find literally hundreds of publications on lower back pain. I mean, it's the second most common reason people go visit primary care in the US after the common cold. And so you can find thousands of publications, but no one's going to want to look at a bunch of references. You need to organize and find the most compelling ones, spend time doing that, get buy-off from your scientific or clinical advisory board or from your internal clinical regulatory folks and get them into a branded support piece that allows you to talk about really good references about why you should be looking at a minimally invasive approach to treating low back pain if it's sacroiliac joint related. And then was really unique for SI bone is we were sort of defining a whole new approach to treating something that spine surgeons really didn't treat since the 1920s. So 100 years later, we're telling them, hey, put your hands on the patient, do some provocative testing, get the fluoroscopy, and here's an algorithm that tells you in one page that you can identify the source of pain. You can identify what the pain generator is. And it's not always discogenic. It's not always hip pain. Third or more of the time, it's sacroiliac joint or SI joint pain. So you can develop these different pieces that really help really reinforce, and you make them available, of course, on your website. And they're part of making you look like you're an educational resource center. You're not just selling them an implantable device for treating SI joint problems that require a fusion. You're actually saying, here's how you identify. And guess what? Most of the time, they're not going to need surgery. They're going to need physical therapy, drugs. They're going to need something else. It's a small percentage of the time that needs surgery, but you're providing a service by educating them about when they should get surgery. And then I talked earlier about case studies. So there's an example of one here. Tend to do these in one page. If it's an implantable device, it's easier to do sometimes. You can put pre and post x-rays or fluoro or CT scans in there. What another tool that's very helpful is in the middle here. I call it a evidence book. And we did this at Aleo. I've done it at other companies where sometimes just creating a monograph isn't enough. You want to have like a bigger online presence that has references. And again, 95% of them aren't even your own companies. They're just published literature that's out there everywhere from, Taipei to the Middle East to Europe to the US. And you can have all these elements, all these publications that really support your messaging. And remember the funnel story, every stage you're supporting that with references. In an evidence book or an ebook really makes a lot of sense for a lot of startup MedTech companies and more advanced ones. So a clinical abstract summary is a sort of a fancier version of a case study. And to be mindful of the time, I'll get to the two summary slides here. So again, marketing, what is it? It does a few things. It helps us really define when we should innovate. And by that, I mean, we're looking at defining solutions to provide solutions for unmet clinical needs. So how do you solve an unmet clinical need? You guys have the answers, potentially a lot of answers there. And you need to provide that solution in a way that differentiates you with a competitive advantage over other elements that are out there, other competitors that are out there. Competitors can be, we can talk about that later, but in the Q&A, but loosely defined competitors, it doesn't have to be Medtronic that's your chief competitor necessarily. It could be, but part of it is, again, going down that funnel and understanding how folks historically have attempted to deal with that big unmet need and why those needs are insufficient. Part of something else we need to do in terms of what is marketing is looking at the financials, working with the finance folks to ensure that we've got a commercialization plan that is realistic, that shows growth, and is going to make a lot of sense to folks, especially investors. And we want to really be out there showing that the customer is willing to pay. Reimbursement is a big deal, but if you have the right product technology and you've done a good job defining the messaging, the branding, and the positioning around it, you're going to find a willingness that might not be there if you didn't spend the time doing this very early on in your organization's history. And then, of course, all of this has an impact on how you're getting financing. So marketing drives success. So sort of at the end here, focus on markets with clear unmet clinical needs. Again, like I quoted Einstein, don't try to over-engineer or significantly change use patterns. Just make things easier. I know that's hard to do because sometimes some of the solutions on paper at least look really complicated. So you really have to think through what you're doing and make sure you're not making it overly complicated. Really try to avoid, unless you have something that is so elemental and simple that it could really do a good job, try not to target markets that are very established and have definite big competitors, because it's much harder to enter those markets. And that leads to number 4 is make sure you segment your market appropriately. Just to say you're in orthopedics, there's a lot of facets of orthopedics. So you'll need to really ensure you're in the right facet of orthopedics as an example. And then build a model that supports innovation. But by that, I think it's really critical that you have something that could potentially disrupt the market. And that could be considered conflicting with number 2 on this slide, because you really want to make things easy, but sometimes, it can be an easy solution, but if it's a market disrupting solution, it might be harder to get people to adopt a really easy solution. And we can talk about some of the tips and tricks involved with that as well. And then lastly, focus on team building, because you need the right talent and you need marketing at day one. And of course I say that because I'm a marketing consultant, but it is actually crucial for a number of reasons. And we can talk about those depending on your questions. So thank you very much for letting me bend your ears.